It is the moment that followed the end of fourth period on Monday, September 13th, at Rower High School, that the loudest birds of the gaggle of attending quacks have proclaimed to be the impetus for what has been called everything from a series of unfortunate behaviors, Dr. Eleanor Turt, to the most bloodthirsty of teenage acts I have ever discussed on my program. Dr. Winnie Mopra, the degree is honorary from a school of dubious academic reputation. Turt's book, Crying Too Hard to Be Scared, says, "It is impossible to overemphasize the importance of this psychosexual voyeuristic moment in Culp's adolescence." What rubbish! Of course she could overemphasize the importance of it. What if she said, "This psychosexual voyeuristic moment in Culp's adolescence was responsible for world hunger"? That would be overemphasis, wouldn't it? That's what's wrong with the coverage of my story, not so much bias as an accuracy. Imagine Culp in the aftermath of one of the first moments of sexual awakening in her argument with her eventual victim. Again, inaccuracy. He was not my victim. Wandering in a sexualized daze to the office of a teacher whom she trusted, seeking advice and counseling. Inaccuracy, inaccuracy, inaccuracy. Yet when she walks in, she finds her teacher betraying her trust, indeed, the very trust of the teaching profession, locked in an embrace with a student. Inaccuracy. It was the ultimate betrayal for young Culp, and triggered a horrific, though slightly delayed response, much like Poe and his mother's death, as discussed in my first chapter. Horrific and not at all delayed amounts of inaccuracy. And even putting aside facts for a minute, Dr. Turt's description has serious semantic problems. Embrace is too elegant a term for what Carr was doing. Just about the only accurate thing Eleanor said was that I walked down the hallway and into a classroom. Unlit Bunsen burners and half-dead tadpoles and faded color posters of the digestive system all greeted me, but Carr was nowhere to be seen. Off the main classroom was Carr's office, which we weren't supposed to go in because it contained dangerous chemicals. I heard a scuffling from it like a rustling of paper. "Mr. Carr?" I called out cautiously and put my hand on the half-open door. "I don't know," I heard someone say softly. "Mr. Carr?" I asked again and pushed the door open all the way. Mr. Carr was in one of those phony white lab coats that biology teachers wear in an apparent effort to look like they're in an aspirin commercial. At first, it just looked like he was standing there, grinning at his desk, but when I followed his gaze, I saw the teaching assistant half sprawled on the blotter, watching him warily. He leaned in and kissed her again. His hand was on her skirt, high up. She said softly, "I don't know. It was not a coy, I don't know. It was a wary, I don't know. It was not, I don't know, why don't you choose the position? It was, I don't know if I should be in this position." He leaned in and kissed her again. I didn't move. I was pretty sure that I wasn't supposed to be seeing this, and I was pretty sure that it wasn't supposed to be happening at all. Talk about dangerous chemicals. "Come on," he said, somewhere between seduction and irritation. The teaching assistant's eyes were half closed, but she saw me anyway. "Oh my God!" She sat up suddenly and bumped her head on a low-hanging shelf of petri dishes. Mr. Carr whirled around and looked at me. His eyes were bright and scary. "What do you want?" he yelled. "What do you want?" "I'm sorry I got class Thursday," I said, backing out of the room. "I'm in a meeting," he yelled. "This is my office. You have no right to come in here." He pounded the door as I scurried past the tadpoles, the posters. A chair clattered to the floor. "Get out!" I got out. In the hallway, some people had heard all the bellowing and were staring at me. A couple of guys were sitting on the floor, their backs against their lockers, open textbooks in their laps. A girl with dyed black hair, a dallying janitor. I ran to the stairway and heard somebody running behind me, running after me. Carr kissing her wasn't scary. Carr yelling was scary, and now he was coming after me. The girl with the dyed black hair grabbed my arm as I hit the ground floor. "Leave me alone," I said, and then realized it was Natasha. I hugged her, hard. I could hear my own breathing, hard. The sound of that breathing is something I'll never forget. "What the fuck?" she said, all snarling lipstick and fingernails. "What the fuck was he shouting at?" "I went in to apologize for cutting class on Thursday," I said. I was still breathing. I sounded like an iron lung. "Take your time," she said. "Here, sit down. You sound like an iron lung." We sat down on the second-to-last step. I rubbed at my face. Some people look good when they're crying, but I'm not one of them, so I tried my hardest to stop. The sound of cars shouting began to dim in my mind's ear, and instead I began to hear, over and over, the plunk of the teaching assistant's head against the petri shelf. I started to laugh. Mind's ear? I don't know. Natasha looked at me warily, the way you look at someone when they shake, then cry, then laugh. A shadow fell over us, and we looked up and saw our vice principal, a fat black man who always wore plaid vests and expressions of self-righteousness. His name is Mr. Moki, pronounced so as to rhyme with okie dokie. He likes to tell people to think of him as a friend and not just a vice principal. Natasha eats those sorts of people alive. No sitting in the stairways, girls, he said. Fire marshal's rules. I am the fire marshal, Natasha snarled. We're having a drill. Look, Mr. Moki said. I don't make the rules, girls. Think of me as a friend, not just a vice principal. After all, the final word in principal is pal. Now move along. Pals don't tell me to move along, Natasha said. We're just going to sit here for a minute, okay? Let us break your stupid rules just once. We won't report you to the Führer. Mr. Moki wrinkled his brow. I don't speak French, he said. Anyway, they're not my rules. I don't want to give you detention, but I have to. My hands are tied. Nobody's making you, Natasha said. If you don't follow the rules, I have to do it. My hands are tied. Don't give me any ideas, I screamed. I could hear the echo, bouncing way up the stairwell to the top floor and beyond, where God and the fire marshal live. It was a raw sound. Mr. Moki scampered away, presumably to fetch some paperwork. Natasha turned to me, clearly impressed. Nice work. Pretty soon you're not going to need me around. Don't be ridiculous, I said. We smiled at each other, friends. So what happened? She asked. We fought for the conversation spot. We'd better have the conversation. I can't talk about it, I said. Why don't you just read about it? I reached in the bag and took out my journal. Her eyebrows shot up. I never let anybody even touch the journal. Go ahead, I said. I flipped it open to the right page and handed it to her. She looked at me again and then just sat there. Read it, right up to the part where I handed her the journal. Oh, wait, that won't work. I can't have written it down yet. All this goddamn clanging. The bell rang, rather. I have to go to civics, I said. We'll talk about this later, Natasha said, handing the journal back to me. Don't tell anybody about this, I shouted, and she ran back up the stairs, a girl with dyed black hair. I walked dumbly into civics, slunk into a chair, and wrote everything down. Jennifer Rose Milton whispered to me that Maman had had too much red wine with some dinner guests last night, so today in French Millie corrected papers behind sunglassed eyes, while we split into groups and read dialogues out loud to one another. What did you put in the soup that night? Shallots and a little red wine. Red wine? Goodness! Wasn't that expensive to purchase? No, not if you go to that store on the corner of Lake and Forest. Lake and Forest? Sounds too pastoral for a modern girl like me. Ah ha ha ha! Did you get the shallots at the market? Yes, and I had to go to 4 stores before I found fresh vegetables. They are so rare in these, can't translate, French times. Did you see your teacher hitting on the teaching assistant? Yes, I did. Was she enjoying herself? No, she wasn't. I think my teacher was too slimy for a modern girl like her. Ah ha ha ha! What? Can't translate. Times we have here at Rower!